In this video, we're going to be talking about paddle versus claw, the pros and cons. Now, if you click on this video, I'm assuming that you know what paddles and claw are, but for those who may not, I'm just going to give a very quick history lesson. First, claw is a style of gaming in which you incorporate your index, middle, and maybe even ring fingers to now start pressing all the buttons instead of just using your index and your thumbs when gaming. This kind of came about as a result of very intense games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, Apex Legends, and so on and so forth. These games require a lot more agility, a lot more versatility, speed, simultaneous movements, and so as a result, the gaming community started having to use more fingers, almost like a robot or an octopus. But that's really hard to do, not everyone can do it. So gaming companies, came up with an idea to add buttons to the back of the controller, thus eliminating the need to use all your fingers in such a weird way. Now, the way that you would grip the controller, you'll also have the ability to press extra buttons when playing. That's kind of how paddles came about, and thus sparked the debate of paddles versus controllers. They each have their pros and cons, and that's what we're going to get into, but we'll start with the pros of paddles first. Number one, hand health. You never really have to worry about if your hands are going to get cramped up or maybe even suffer injuries or long-term effects like arthritis or carpal tunnel. All that is fine because you're using a controller with paddles on the back, so when you're playing the game where your fingers would normally rest, you can now use them to play at an even higher level. Never have to worry about things getting too tricky or too difficult. They're just as easy to use as any other button on your controller. Number two, another pro is that you get some pretty cool controllers. Your collection starts to really add up. I mean, this is a cool controller, this is a cool controller. I have more, I'll show you them. You get to really build some cool controllers. Your friends might even start to admire you and appreciate your gaming ability. And maybe another pro is that you could even get sponsored. You see, if you were like a YouTube or a professional gamer, if you actively use a certain type of controller from a certain type of company, it's very likely that you would end up getting sponsored by that company or controller brand. I mean, they want people to see that their controllers are good for gaming, and if you're good at gaming and use their controllers, then game over. But here are the cons. Paddles are very expensive. Controllers that use paddles on average will run you anywhere between $100 to even sometimes $300. Now, there are some cheaper options out there like the Turtle Beach Recon or the PowerA Spectra Enhanced controller. I mean, there's definitely a couple controllers out there that are actually kind of a little cheaper than the average controller. So there are definitely options out there for you to get started, and it's very viable. But another con to these controllers is that they're not always durable. You see, sometimes these controllers take so much to make, or rather the companies really don't care too much about the customers because they know that we're going to buy them anyway, which is unfortunate. We should really stop doing that. But a lot of these controllers tend to really not last more than a year, and that's a little bit on the high side. Sometimes, especially if you're like a professional gamer or you game a lot, these controllers may not last more than 6 months. Now, that is a very situational thing. All my controllers, I've actually had a lot of luck. All my controllers last more than a year, but I don't play every day for 10 hours a day. So it really depends on who you are and how often you play. But if you're a person who wanted to get used to paddles instead of playing claw, and you're not going to play super amounts of time, paddles are a fine investment. And another con is that once you start using certain types of paddles or controllers, you might become a little dependent on these controllers. So the thing is, your ability to go from one controller to another controller may not be so smooth because you're getting really used to a certain type of controller. Its feel, its actuation points, its movement, sensitivities, all these things. These are all things that come into play. And so if you're getting used to one or two types of controllers, maybe the day that you end up maybe at a friend's house or just out of luck and you have to compete with a different controller, you might find a bit of an issue. So that's another problem. But now let's move on to the pros of claw. So claw doesn't have that many pros, but they're very solid pros. For one, you'll be able to play with any controller, literally any controller. If you can learn to do all this at like a high level, if you can learn to do that, you'll probably be good with just about any controller. Like, your base level performance is on average going to be higher than a person who's getting used to paddles. That's really the truth. If you can really learn to play like this, you'll go far. And it's cheap. You don't have to spend any more money at all. Any more money. The $60 controller or even the $30 controller that you buy, that's it. The only time you have to spend more money is if your controller breaks. No real need for upgrades or additional setups or accessories to your controllers. No need for any of that. You just need your hands and your fingers to work, and as long as that's the case, you'll be fine. So very, very money friendly, this option. But now here's the con, and really the number one con of claw: arthritis, carpal tunnel, injuries, strains, sprains, all that. Those are the real cons of playing claw. Now, many people in the claw community argue that that's not the case, and it's a fine argument if it never happened to you, but there are others who have tried claw and it happened to them, and their hands are slightly different or not even the same at all. So these are things that you need to keep in mind when you decide that you want to play claw. And some people in the claw community will even argue that it's about the way that you play claw. You know, how you set up your hands, how you hold the controller, the type of gestures and movements you make, the game that you play, all these different factors and variables that come into play. It's such a situational thing. Me personally, I can't do it. Tried it, can't do it. It's very difficult. There's a controller. Just bringing my hand to, it's very difficult. I find it to be a hassle. I start feeling it after like 10 to 15 minutes of play. Again, but they make an argument that your hands will get used to it. You don't have to worry. And it's just a very situational thing. I used to play sports. Everyone is really different. What the type of workout that might work for one person may not work out for another. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing you have to keep in mind when it comes to playing claw is that you're going to have to get into hand exercises, hand stretches, wrist stretches, all these different things to make sure that you don't get stiff or you don't run the risk of getting an injury. These are all things that you're going to have to get used to. Another thing you got to get used to is that you'll probably have to take longer breaks from gaming. See, since you're using your fingers at such a high level, you're going to need to take breaks. You might need to ice your hand, you might need to, and I'm not joking, like these are things that have come from the claw community where in order to keep your hands fresh and warmed up and ready for every game, you're going to need to rest them. Rest them, keep them away for certain things, give it a good time to like shake it off, all these different things. Like that's real parts of the claw community as well. And the last con is, it might also ruin the look of your hands. Your hands may start to bend or, develop marks on them from overuse, bruisings, all these different things. Aesthetically, claw can really start taking a toll. Paddles, you leave the way you came in. But when you do claw, it could really, the worst case scenario of claw is that you might end up with long-term damage and ugly hands. Worst case of paddle, you spend a few bucks. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much up to you. It is really up to you what works for you. I'm a paddles guy. A lot of people are paddles people. Then you have some people who are claw. And I'll be honest, claw is actually, like, if you took away all the negative side effects, it's probably more effective and more efficient than any paddle could be, because your hands can keep getting quicker, you can keep getting better, your muscle memory can keep getting higher and all these different things when pressing all the buttons. But your paddles, they may actually get worse over time. So it's a little tricky. It's really up to you. It just is. I'm just here to deliver the pros and cons. Let me know if I did anything wrong, if I said anything, if I missed out on anything. Please, I really appreciate it. Remember to like and comment. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Chukavelli here. Chukavelli out.